Hey everybody, welcome to the In All Things podcast. It's time to see God in everything. Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of the In All Things podcast. My name is Mitch Frost and today I'm joined by...
your one and only lead pastor, Steve Markle.
What an introduction.
I did not plan that.
Do we need to spend some time there?
Should we start over?
No, I think
let's
just go with it. The one and only lead pastor, Steve Markle.
Yes.
Is that what you want your new title to be?
You know what?
I think we should change it.
Let's just change all of our titles.
Okay.
What do you want to be?
I'm good with mine.
Come on with something.
No,
different.
I don't want to be the one and only anything.
What are we going to call Jared when we hire a new worship leader?
What is his title?
What is his title?
The new one.
Associate pastor? Is that what we said?
I don't know.
Assistant to the regional pastor.
Yep.
I don't know.
Anyway, well, welcome back to the table.
Thank you
it's
for
our
having me
second
back,
to
yeah.
last episode of this season, and then we'll be off for a couple months. We were just actually having a conversation of what the summer will look like.
Yeah.
We might have some special things, maybe once in June, once in July,
little
once in
one-off
August.
episodes, Yep.
And then we'll be back later this year. But we still have a couple of conversations left that we want to have here
Yes.
for this season. Kind of as, you know, if you're watching for the first time or listening for the first time, we're kind of playing off of a series that we've been in for 5 weeks now.
Yes.
The
White Elephant series.
Nope.
Somebody came by the guest center yesterday. I said, I really appreciate this White Elephant series.
Oh.
I'm like, okay. I just let it go. I'm not going to correct you on that. That was appreciated.
Sure. We're trading gifts of
We're trading gifts.
truth and knowledge, maybe.
There you go. With love.
Anyway, the Elephant in the Room series that we've been in for 5 weeks now, and we are approaching week number 6, which is going to be the last one.
Yes, amen.
And so, you know, we've been diving into some hot topics and some big issues. I've heard multiple people say, I know I wouldn't want to get up there and preach something like that. So,
Neither would I.
but we've done it, and we're going through it, and you're going through it, and we're coming up near the end of it now. And we were off last week from, you know, you and me being at this table because we had a special Mother's Day interruption to the season, but it was awesome. And I think Christy and Tucker, shout out to them. They did a great job.
Yeah, I watched it. It was great. Yep.
And so we're kind of going to combine two sermons into this one conversation. 2 weeks ago, you had a sermon about does Christianity oppress minorities and women, and you know, kind of dove into some things there. And then yesterday, you got into what does the Bible say about the transgender movement, or what does God say about? And so we're going to kind of roll those two episodes or those two sermons into one conversation here.
That'll be fun.
I think there's an overarching theme in the two, so I think there is going to be a thread that maybe takes us through both. But let's just start. We'll go big picture, and then we'll kind of zoom in and see where we land on some details. But for you, just give us how you felt about both. What was prep like for both? You know, how did Microsoft Word do with some of your sermon notes?
That's funny.
Just kind of fill us in on what these past 2 weeks looked like for this series.
You know, it's funny because the 2 weeks ago now seems distant to me because of so much prep that goes into each one of these. I would say that this series has stretched me more than any series I've done that I can remember in terms of research, really diving into delivery in the appropriate way of saying things with the right tone. So the stress level has been higher than I've ever had. And not just like afraid that I'm going to offend somebody, because, you know, the Bible, like you've said and I've said, it's not meant to be liked, but meant to be followed. So we know that the Bible and the gospel can be offensive, and that's okay. But just wanting to educate myself well so I can say things the correct way. And so these last 2 weeks, I've had to read a lot of stuff and listen to a lot of sermons. And, you know, sometimes you write things down that people say, and then you're like, is that right? And then you know, so then I want to make sure that I can find a source for everything that I'm saying, and not just saying things that I heard somebody else say. So that just takes extra work, you know. So all that preparation and delivery has been exhausting, and more than ever, I've enjoyed and also felt like I'm exhausted at the same time. Like I don't know how to explain that. It's like it's rewarding when you put in all the work, and then you feel like it's making a difference in people's understanding of something, that's so rewarding, but it's also so exhausting. So more than ever, I'm looking forward to the conclusion, not that I just want it to be over, but that I can take a little mental break and do some study for a future series. And I'm looking forward to what comes next, because I think we've maybe said it, but you're going to do a series, and I'm excited for that because I'm going to use that time to study, prep, and look at what we're going to do this fall. Yeah. And I haven't had thinking space for that. So funny thing happened last week, preparing for the transgender message. Not funny. It wasn't funny at the time, but on Wednesday, I think it was.
Me and Jared thought it was a little bit
funny. Because my reaction, and so I had gotten my notes done, and what I do using Word, like most people probably use Word of some type of Word document. I do a long form of my sermon notes, not word for word, but in this series, almost word for word. And I'd taken like 12 pages of notes from listening and reading and all that. And then I took that and condensed it, organize it into my sermon, and then I highlight all the things that are going to be on the screen that everybody sees. And then I take that document and save it as another file, and I send that to Jared and to you during this series to review what's going to be on the screen. So when I went back to get my notes onto my iPad, the notes that I had, the original document, was from the day before. Basically what that meant is all I had was my original notes I had taken from listening and all that, but I didn't have anything that I had written and organized except for what was going to be on the screen. So I was down to that. So I was pretty upset and discouraged because of all the sermons, this was like, you got to be kidding me. So I had to refigure all of that out, and it took me many more hours. And I don't know why that happened, but it happened. And so anyway.
Yeah, I mean, this episode's paid for by Google Docs.
Yes. This man here that I'm speaking with this morning, all he could say to comfort me was, well, I use Google Docs. It would never happen if I used Google Docs. It would never happen. So every time you check to see how I was doing, you're like, Google Docs. And I'm like,
yeah, it's true.
All right, that's nice.
I mean, every letter you type,
I understand that.
As soon as you type
Google
it,
Docs.
Google
I do for other things that I share and collaborate with people on, and other things like that. But I like all my sermon files that I've ever done being in the same place. But
that is the white elephant in the room. Google Docs is better than Microsoft Word. Anyway, yeah. So. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. You know, it's taxing enough to weekly turn around, thoughts into some kind of manuscript, into some kind of sermon, into slides, into doing it, into practicing it, right? Every week, that's exhausting. And so to have 6 weeks of a series that's stretching you even further than that, I think it's pretty natural by the end of it to be like, okay, like this has been great, this has been awesome, this has been worth it, but I would love, a little bit of a breather,
I'm
of a
telling
break.
You, I'm so I've never been this excited to be finished in a series, just because. Especially because I know a break's coming, and I'm thankful for you doing what you're going to do next. But man, like today, I'm like, usually I've been ahead, and today I'm starting this week's message.
To catch up with you.
And I'm not ahead at all. Yeah. So today I'm like, but Steve, dig in. This is it. You know, when you're like that close to something, you dig in. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to get it done. I got some other meetings and stuff going on this week as well. Like it's not the most conducive, but it's going to happen. And I'm excited. I already start thinking for this last one. Some people have asked me, which one was the hardest? Was it the same-sex one or the racism one, or the transgender one? And I'm like, each one is different. Yeah. Hard different.
You're hitting different groups of people that are struggling with this stuff.
And I tell you, this one that I close with on what the Bible says and what Jesus says about politics and how we should handle ourselves, as I'm already digging in, I'm like, oh man, this one ain't gonna be fun either. For a lot of people, it's gonna offend different people. Every week, different people are offended or don't like it. That's okay. It's kind of exciting. Then I'm gonna be, maybe out of town the next weekend, so that's good. People can't find me.
Yeah, just leave.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Anyway, so let's kind of dive into the 2 sermons that you had these past 2 weeks as we get close or heading towards this last week. But let's start with, does Christianity oppress minorities and women, right? That's kind of what you dove into
Yes.
2 weeks ago. And you kind of did a good job of balancing history of America, history of Christians in America, history of, Bible in general, and kind of working through this idea that, it's I loved the main overarching point that Christianity is the most exclusive and inclusive group, I think is what he said. Right. I don't know what the word used, but but I think that maybe that's a good place for us to start, is maybe breaking down those two things, because a lot of your sermon, I feel like, fit under that kind of main point, right. that Christianity is the most inclusive, right? And you use the verse from Paul that there's no longer Jew or Gentile. Yeah,
the Greeks were the predominant
man or woman, right? Slave or free, right?
Right.
And he's talking about how because of what Jesus has done, a lot of these barriers between who can be saved and who can and who thinks they're good enough, whatever, it's all broken down now.
Right.
And so that's why we say that Christianity is the most inclusive, because based on those, gender, race, where you're from, class, whatever, none of that takes away, the fact that Jesus died for you, right? And so that's kind of where the inclusive part comes from. Is this wasn't, a religion that was formed on, in America. It wasn't a religion that, we came up with to oppress. It wasn't any of those things. This was around way before any of those things happened. Yes. And so, it is very inclusive, right? Correct. There's nobody that is outside of what Jesus has done for them, 100%. Right? And then, but it's also exclusive, right? So, what are your thoughts on that? I know we've talked about that a little bit.
Sure,
on here, but
we talked
it's hard
about
not
that.
to talk
Jesus
about
said,
that. But
I'm the way, the truth, the life. No one gets to God except through Him. So it's inclusive because the door's wide open. On the door, anybody can come. Yep. Everybody's welcome to the party, but there's only one way in. There's only one door, and you got to go through that door, and that's Jesus. So I think that pretty much speaks for itself.
Yep.
Exclusive.
Kind of the balance of the two, right?
Yep.
But I just love this idea, of all nations, all tribes, all tongues will speak and worship the name of Jesus, right?
Yes.
There is nobody that Jesus didn't die for. And as simple as that sounds and as basic as that sounds, it's so hard for people to actually, live that way, right? And that's kind of why you dove into this message of just kind of, okay, let's actually look at the facts of is Christianity oppressive and all those different types of things. And it's actually the opposite, right? Jesus came to set us free, but set us free to His way of doing things and God's way of doing things in the kingdom, which is better than our way, right?
Absolutely.
So all those things put together. But any, kind of thoughts or anything that you felt that sermon or anything there?
No, I mean, I the thing that I think is our heart here, you and I, all of our staff, is that we would love Sunday morning to be the least segregated hour of the day of the week, but it's still so often in so many churches, especially in our area, it's like so predominantly there's black churches and white churches and Hispanic churches, and sometimes if it's a language thing, of course that makes sense. But I think our heart is that we start to see what heaven will look like here on earth more, and that's one of the things that I want so badly. And again, we've talked about this before, but you can't force that. You can't make it happen. But whenever people of different races come into our church, it excites me because I think, man, this is what it should look like more and more. And, I think, though, just in the message, I think it just made some people think a little bit about our history, a little bit more. Some of the older generation, I think, sometimes forget about the stains on American history in the world of things that were done in the name of Christ and how awful that was. And we need to be reminded of that. And we need to make sure that our hearts are right. And as we think toward the future, I think somebody said, is that harder to talk about? Not really, because to me, it's be terrible to say it's a black and white issue, but it is, you know what I mean? It's not like there's no room in there for gray. It's like we have to treat everyone as a creation of God, and it's horrible that we don't. Yeah,
definitely.
And
I think that's a great point. There's some people that, I mean, really, when it comes down to it, they're just not. This sounds so, but it's true. But they're just not educated on the past or educated on Christians, like you said, doing things in the name of Jesus, but having slaves and doing these things, and like people just aren't aware that that's the history that we have, right? To some degree, they're just kind of like, oh, really? Like that, is that really what happened? Like, and so I think you bringing light and shedding light onto some of that stuff at the beginning of the message was really good. Like you showed that picture that I know stuck with a lot of people of, in the church, and there's this huge banner that says Jesus saves. And then the first 3 rows of people are all, KKK members, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, as crazy as that seems to us in 2023 to look at that picture and be like, wait, hold on, do you not see what you're doing here? There's some people that are like, whoa, I didn't realize that that's, the history that we had,
that
right?
Was actually, so I'm thankful that we're removed from that, but there's still so much work that needs to be done.
Right.
And there's more subtle forms of it, and it goes both ways. I mean, there's absolute issues that need to get better, but
right. Yeah. I mean, it's like, we're not going to, we're not ignorant enough to sit here and say, well, everything's great now. I mean, come on. Like, but at the same time, like everything it is better than what it has been. It's, better than what it was, but
I think that
there's things to be done.
Our faith isn't being used like it used to be.
Right. Weaponized.
Yeah. So that's what we've gotten better at, but we individually as Christians need to just check ourselves in the mirror and, don't assume that you don't have any tendencies that you say you don't, because you may. And so anyway. Yeah.
But what you just said, like, there's still things that need to be done. And then some people can say, oh, well, what does that look like? What are the things that need to be done? What can I do? And I think just starting the conversation, I think part of the series is just starting conversations, making you think about things you haven't thought of before. That's a really good way to start, doing something about some of these issues, is just beginning to be okay with having conversations about it, right?
Well, you said that you liked my reworked conclusion of that message, which was 3 questions. If you remember, like, when was the last time that you actually sat down, spent time with, hung out with somebody of a different race?
Yep.
That is so challenging. I mean, I'm looking at myself, like, when's the last time you looked in the mirror and said, is there any prejudice in me? And I think sometimes, I forget what the 3rd question was, but I think we can easily say that we're not struggling in those areas of race or not, any of that kind of stuff, but we sometimes aren't doing anything proactively. I think that's what I said too. It says something about, it's not just about tolerating one another, it's about being proactively loving toward people that are different than us. And I think we've gotten better where we're more tolerant of each other in different races and all that, but we don't do anything to learn or to grow and to understand and show love, like really show love. So anyway.
I remember very vividly when I was kind of gut checked with a moment like this. I was coming out of college and Bible school, and gonna have my degree in ministry, and went to school in Circleville and whatever. And I remember listening to this podcast about these issues, and they were talking about this whole idea of when's the last time you've sat with somebody, learned with somebody, and it was a black guy talking to a white guy, and he said, think about your college experience. There's 2 people in ministry, and he said, I want you to think through the names that they talked about and the books you learned from. And he said, were any of those people, did any of them look different than you? And the guys, and it had been a long time since he'd been in seminary, but he said, no, all of them looked like me. They were white, straight conservative guys. And for me, I started thinking about my own college experience, and I was like, pretty much every textbook I had, every theologian that we quoted and everything like that looked like me, had the same kind of perspective as me, and that's a gut check. Like that's we've talked about that on this podcast a lot, but just putting yourself in echo chambers where everybody looks like you, thinks like you, talks like you, lives like you, it reinforces, oh, my way is the best way and my way is right, and it can be a real gut checking thing when you kind of raise your eyes up and look outside of your perspective and you go, oh, there's a lot more world than what I'm experiencing, True. And I think this conversation, is kind of it's a first step. You didn't give all the answers and solve every problem, but it's a first step of realizing, even if you like you said in the message, I'm not racist, or I have a friend, but like even if you say those things, that's great. But you may still have some stuff inside of you that is prejudice and it is against people who don't look like you, and that's so hard because we don't want to think that way about us, and we don't want to think that we have that stuff in us, but we do.
But I even brought up too, it's not always just prejudice against people that look different in terms of color. It can be prejudice against people who are richer than us or poorer than us, and we look at them and like, well, I mentioned like, you're poor because you don't work hard enough, or you're rich because it was all given to you, and you're greedy and you're snobbish and you're not, and I think you can just go down different areas, and men and women can look differently at each other and just make assumptions because of gender. So I think there's just it's a very dangerous road, but when it comes to that verse, that was the key one in Galatians 3:28. It's really looking at each person as a child of God, not male or female, not poor or rich, not black or white or any race. And so that's a challenge for all of us. Yeah.
And that kind of brings us to, this is kind of the thread I thought that maybe we'd have between these two messages, is this whole distinction between us and them, I think is so dangerous. And what we're kind of shedding light on in this conversation already is kind of realizing yet again how even if we say we don't have this us versus them mentality, I think it's so prevalent, and I think it is there maybe more than we think it is. And so yesterday you kind of got into, what does the Bible say about the transgender movement? So let's start there, and then we'll go back to kind of this us versus them and what that looks like. But let's stop for a second, pause. How did you feel about that message? Give us, maybe a summary. Where'd you go with it? Wherever you want to start.
Oh, it was, it's funny because when I was preparing, I thought this will be similar to what the same-sex message felt like, and it didn't feel like that at all. I guess I thought of it that way because we're talking about LGBTQ, so we're talking about LGB maybe before, and more of the T yesterday, but it was different. I spent more time than I would imagine in a message defining terms, but I felt like that was necessary because I'm thinking about myself as a maybe representative of the church, and of our demographic. I didn't know a lot of what those things meant. So I'd heard them and kind of had an idea, but I really had to dig deep in the define these things, understand these things, so I can talk about them. So it's like, am I just giving everybody too much to handle? So there was that tension of like, is this too much for a 35-minute sermon? I think it turned out to be 38, but is it too much, or is it what is necessary? So, and I don't want to spend so much time education, defining things and not get deep enough into the Bible part of the whole thing, because that's what we're all about. So yeah, how did I feel? I felt fine about it. I felt like it was accomplished the purpose of giving people some biblical handles on it. The Bible doesn't say the same things. Like we talked about homosexuality, specifically states these things are sinful, whereas the Bible doesn't speak like somewhere where it says to change your gender is sinful. It doesn't say that explicitly. Right. So we have to look more at biblical principles about God and creation, what Jesus said about our identity, all of that. So it was more challenging in that way. The main thing wanted to accomplish was to get people to understand some things biblically, but also to learn to be more compassionate, because I feel like this is my perception that the world today, this issue is like front and center. Like I said it yesterday, like every day there's a news story of something related to trans. There is something new in the news, whether you're more on one side of it or the other side of it. There's another story of somebody somewhere that was mistreated on both sides and yelled at, screamed at, misgendered, disrespected, and everybody's fighting. And I feel like it's so much volatility on this issue. So like, how can I communicate to the church, be compassionate, think about human lives. And we might not like the arguments, we might disagree with the arguments, but remember, behind those arguments are people who are so deeply struggling with suicidal thoughts. And I share some statistics that were from NIH and, about the number of people that are transgender that struggle with, even after they've changed or they've not changed, with their identity and wanting to take their life. And this is why we need to care. And this is why we need to talk about it, because people are hurting and we all have issues and we all have things that we struggle with, but this is serious. And the more I talked about it, the more I felt burdened for the ones that, really deeply down deeply do struggle. Not because I did talk a lot about social media and how it's influenced. And I think we all are aware that TikTok has had a big influence on teenagers that are struggling, but making them think about things that they wouldn't have thought about if it wasn't for the influencers. But deep down, there's some that are really, really struggling, but because it's become so big and loud and angry, some of the people that need help aren't getting help. Right. And that's a burden that I feel, and I don't know what to do about it.
And unfortunately, a lot of these hot button issues, that's happening. Like the people who think they're representing and think they're speaking for everyone, advocates, and think they're so loud and so angry and so and it is minimizing the people who are actually struggling with with homosexuality or gender dysphoria. Like they're struggling with depression, suicide. I don't feel like who I'm supposed to be. I don't feel right in my skin. I don't feel, and they actually need attention and medical help and all the things, and like they're not getting it because the advocates are just screaming and loud, and
there's extreme things that are being said and done, and influences, and things that are being done with kids in younger ages in their schools and being talked about, and that makes people so upset that then those that really need help aren't.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Right. And that's heartbreaking, right? I mean,
really
the statistics of the suicide rates and the depression and of the people who are really struggling with this and they're not being heard, like that should break our hearts, because like you just said, like every story, every number on a statistic, like that's a person that's something God designed that human being and desires to know them and love them, and the fact that they're hurting that much or struggling so bad that I'm just gonna go change who I am completely down to my DNA, like that should break our hearts.
It's heartbreaking. And the reading about like what has happened in the UK, they've been more advanced than us in terms of encouraging operations and changes for adolescents, and that they now are 10 years later just so much regret and going back, like the first answer that so many times our children are given is just change, and like and I think I hope it came across the right way, but like we make a lot of decisions that when we're kids that just our brains aren't fully developed, and to think about making changes to our bodies that could take away our ability to be able to have kids one day. I mean, it's so sad, and I feel more sad about it than angry about it. I don't, it's like being angry about it is one thing, but being sad for those who are struggling is, I think, where our hearts should be. First.
Absolutely. I think I don't remember who said this. Classic Mitch move to have a quote, but don't remember where it's from. But I know that I've heard recently, if this is the way that you think it can help with a lot of these issues of, every number has a name and every name has a story and every story has an eternity, right? So every single number and the statistics and there's this many people at this rally and there's that, they all have names, right? God knows their names. God knows the amount of hairs on their heads. Sure. They all have a story of why they feel what they feel, and maybe something that happened to them in their past when they were kids and now they're reacting this way, or right? They all have stories, and every story, every person, every name has an eternity. They're going somewhere, and that can kind of help, like you said, kind of take some of this anger out of these situations and kind of replace it with this sadness, this heartbroken, this empathy of I want to do something, right? And so I think it's so tricky, and I think a big thing that we always dance around with all of these conversations is this identity word, right? We say it so much. Okay, they're just looking for identity and they're looking for a place to belong, and I couldn't agree more. Like I think that is the heart cry of the world we live in, is they want to belong to something. And that's why, yet again, we're bringing it up, we're going back into it, this us versus them thing is so dangerous, because if I have a group that supports me and loves me and is going to affirm what I do, then I'm going to be more willing to, even if I don't fully agree, I'm going to go all in and I'm going to yell and I'm going to fight and I'm going to stand up for them because I have a place that I belong to, right? And so I think that fuels a lot of what we're seeing, and a lot of what's going on is there's people who are just wanting so desperately to have a group, to have a place, to have people who know them, and so they're willing to do anything to belong anywhere, to say anything, to promote anything, to post anything, if they have people backing them, right? And anybody who's against them then is just bigoted and angry and hateful and all the things. And so I think that's the fuel to the fire of what we're seeing, and I think that should break our hearts too, because they're belonging to a group that is going to not end up in a very good place at the end of the road.
No. Like one of the things I said early was, I think Christians can get frustrated by culture. We can obviously not like things in our culture like this movement, but I said early that our role is to meet culture where it is and show them a better way, not just yell at culture. And I think the tendency is to just yell at culture and say, this is so stupid. This is so dumb. Why would you think that? Somebody said to me, and I know they were joking, but they said, this is an easy issue. I guess I'll say this. They said, just tell people to look in their pants, then they'll know what they are. I'm like, that is part of the problem, is that we say things like that. Now, maybe they were just saying it in jest, and just felt safe to say that there. But there are people that say that. And like, I know what they're saying and I understand biology, right? But that's not helpful.
Right.
It's not helpful in the discussion and in the understanding and the conversation. So, wow, it's hard. It is difficult to navigate. But anyway, I was going to ask you a question in this and just see what you think about this. This question I hear come up. People ask me, what do you think about this? Because if you work in the world and you're in a workplace, how do you feel about, should we as Christians in a workplace or school call people by the gender that they want to be called by, even if they are obviously not that gender?
Sure. It's a great question. Yeah. And it gets brought up a lot. And I have students who have high school jobs and they'll work with so-and-so that, hey guys, by the way, these are my pronouns and it's not what they look like. And I've gotten those texts of, hey, I called somebody the wrong pronoun at work tonight and I got in trouble. And I don't know what to do, and I don't know how to respond. And so it's a very, very real question. Here's my response to it whenever I have these conversations with students. But my response is this, and the few situations I work here, so I'm not out into,
Jared, what are your pronouns?
But the few times that I have and, kind of had these moments, my thing is this. Okay, so if I choose, right, because I'm a Christian and I feel like it's wrong and I choose not to use the person's pronouns that they're asking me to use, what am I accomplishing in doing that? Really nothing. They're not going to say, hey, man, like, I noticed that you chose not to call me by my pronouns. Can I ask why? Is it because you're a follower of Jesus? Can we talk? No, it's never going to happen.
No.
So my response is this: learn their name and call them by their name, because you can't really go wrong there. And there's not too much anger that can be placed on you if you just call them by their name, right? The pronoun thing it can be very confusing, and there's lots of anger attached to it, and that's why I'm saying, like, let's say there's a biological male who wants to go by her and she and all, right? And I accidentally call them him, right? Or I call them him on purpose because I'm a Christian and I just don't agree. That biological male that's identifying as a girl, whatever, is not going to, oh my gosh, like, just come to Jesus because I did that. They're never going to have a moment of looking at that situation and going, that person, they refused to call me by the pronouns I wanted to go by, and it just made me really appreciate them and love them so much. Because we live in such an angry, heated culture, they're just going to be mad, and it's going to reaffirm that Christians, the stereotypes of hypocritical and bigoted and all the things, and so they're just going to push it even further. But if I can just say, hey, what's your name? Oh, my name's whatever, and just call them that and consistently just call them their name. I can't go wrong there.
No.
And so that's my response, because I don't think you're gonna win by I'm you know what, I'm gonna call you what you look like. Look in your pants. It's never going. That's never going to move anybody towards Jesus or move anybody towards realizing like, oh, that's a Christian, they love me so well. Never, ever, 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 ever is that response going to add to that. So that's my personal view on that.
I think that's a great.
I don't think you can go wrong from saying, "Oh, what's your name?" What's your name? Or if you work with them, you know their name. Just consistently in the back of your mind, I'm always going to call them by their name. I know that's tricky. I get it.
Yeah.
But you can do it. I promise.
Yeah, I think that's a good move. I think there's misgendering on purpose, and there's accidental, not knowing. I think that is there's two different things. I think I shared in one of the services I just saw, and I saw the video that somebody recorded of a Starbucks barista who was trans who got angry at a customer for misgendering them, and the lady wasn't even trying to make a point, and because another customer started videoing it, she's like, and the barista started yelling, "You're transphobic, and you don't get your coffee, and get out of my store," and then they came and grabbed the camera from the person and grabbed it, and the person got fired. But my point being, in telling this, is there's this anger behind it, like almost like some people that are transgender just waiting for somebody to say the wrong thing so they can get mad at them.
I think a lot of Christians have that too.
Yeah.
I do.
Like,
I think there's a lot of Christians that are waiting for somebody to do something stupid or do something crazy in their minds just so they can be angry about it too, or they can scoff, or they can laugh, or they can, be the one recording the video. Like I do think there's a lot of that on both sides, which is, it's upsetting because it's just, there's a lot of anger right now on every side of this conversation.
I mean, and I think it's like somebody's just waiting. That's why I don't think we should, as Christians, do things to incite things.
No.
But I also think there needs to be some like we should all strive for understanding, no matter who we are, and be calm and not volatile about it. But it is, and people, I've heard people say, like at their work, they're supposed to put their pronouns on their email tag, with their name. Should a Christian do that, or should they refuse?
Are you required by your job? Do you want to lose your job?
Yeah, that's what.
Right? To some degree, right?
Right?
There's a logical side of it of like, oh, am I required by my job responsibility and what they're asking me to do to keep this job? I have to add, that I'm a he, him on it.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Right. But am I going out of my way to add it to my social media profiles and things like that? Correct. That's a different conversation because you're looking for it and you're kind of like.
Some people just say, like, I'm just giving into society and feeding into it by giving into that type of thing. I mean, if it's your job and you're going to lose your job for not putting it on there, I know it's just these are questions that people ask, and it's a challenge to live in this world, not be of the world, right? And to treat people with respect, and call them what they want to be called, even if deep down we're like, I don't agree with it. You know, like, where's it going to get us in the argument by miscalling them what they don't want to be called? I mean, it's just one of those difficult things.
Two things I want to end on, kind of two closing thoughts that I've been thinking throughout these last couple weeks of the series and everything. One, and this yesterday I was feeling this pretty strongly listening to the message and everything. I think, the cultural cry is that, our bodies, our choice, our sexuality, our choice, whatever we want, we should do, whatever feels good, we should do. I think it's more dangerous than we think to take our bodies and our sexualities into our own hands. I think that, as simple as it sounds, I think God designed us the way that we are for a reason. I think that God knows more than we do. And I think this cultural cry and movement of the last couple of years of just, we're going to do whatever we want, and anybody who's against us is, hates us. And if you don't fully support us, then you don't love us at all, and you hate us. And whatever feels good, whatever feels right. I don't want to be this gender today, so I'm going to be this. And I don't want to go here. I'm going to date this person. I don't want options in this gender, so I'm going to switch my gender. And like all this just taking it into our hands and thinking that we know better than God, I think is really, really dangerous. And it scares me a lot of just where our culture is going, if I can be honest. Like, it scares me because I think it's so dangerous to regardless of how they feel about the God of the universe and if they believe or if they don't, whatever. For me, I'm obviously a very strong believer in the fact that there's a God of the universe that loves us and died for us. But whenever I try to take anything into my own hands and think I know better than him, it scares me because I know that I don't. So when I'm looking at the world as a whole and I'm seeing this whole cultural shift to just do whatever you want and we'll support you and we'll love you and whatever you want to do it, it scares me a little bit because where's this going to go, right? Where are we heading? We know where we're heading, but where are we heading to where people are just in any way, hey, I'm a 40-year-old guy and I love a 12-year-old. Well, I'm in charge. Like, that's so scary to me that, the world more and more so thinks that they just have liberty and license to do whatever they want because there is a God who is holy, who is just, who is, the standard of all those things. And so as Christians, this where culture is going should worry us a little bit, right? Because there's people in our families, there's people in our lives, there's people at coworkers, there's people who are taking liberty on something that they never were supposed to own because God designed it, God created it, and God knows how it works and how it doesn't. And at some point there is judgment on those things, and there is a standard for what's right and what's wrong, as much as we don't like to say that. And so I don't know, this conversation specifically about gender and transgender and things like that, it just worries me, and I'm not a worrier, and it worries me.
Is it amplified in the last 2 months for you because you have a daughter now?
Yeah, there's parts of it for sure. Do
you see things you start seeing the world differently?
A little bit.
Yeah,
a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I was just curious.
Yeah, I think the older she gets, more so.
Yeah.
But yeah, little things, passionate about my body, my choice, and movements like that. And I'm looking at this baby and I'm thinking about, there's so many people I know that can't have babies, and I'm looking at the world that just says, hey, if you don't want it, just kill it. And so I'm starting to have more thoughts on those types of things.
My body, my choice is not just about the abortion conversation.
No, it's not.
And it goes into all the things you just said.
Yeah.
And that whole philosophy, and it's a very scary place that we live in that way. And I think how we meet culture in that and talk about that, and that doesn't mean we don't respect women or care about women. When we talk about life, where it begins, there's this idea that we can't have those conversations because it just is hurtful. Well, who created our bodies? It all goes back to what I talked about yesterday. Where did our bodies come from? If we believe God created them, then we are not our own. Yeah. We've been bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God with your body. It goes back to the personhood conversation, whether we think our body's just an organism we can do whatever we want with, because we can have our mind think whatever we want, that we're not all connected. All that matters. But it is, so yeah. Yeah. Was that just a statement, or was that a question, or what you just, that whole thing you just said?
Just a statement. Just wanted to bring it to the table.
You need to love more. Yeah. Worry less, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But how do you do that? How do you not worry about it?
Yet again, maybe I should Google this so I know exactly where it is in the Bible. But I love this whole idea of, breaking my heart for what breaks God's, right? Oh, yeah. And I do very strongly believe that God is looking at our cultural moment and what's going on, and he's very heartbroken. I really, really, really believe that.
Oh, I do too. And I believe, I hear it in our family discussions about, man, I wish could afford to put my kids in Christian school, to pull them out of some of that. And you think about that, is that the right answer? Everybody has to make their own choice for their family. I fully believe that's your choice to do. But
absolutely,
it is scary. There's different things in elementary and middle, high school that you look at and how they're equipped to handle discussions. But man, a lot of decisions.
The other point, as I'm trying to find this verse still, maybe not.
A verse that says,
"Yeah,
let my heart break for what breaks your heart."
Anyway,
I think that's a song.
I don't know if it's a verse. Maybe it's not. Anyway, the other thought I wanted to end on, because it really convicted me a couple weeks ago when I heard it, and we've been kind of saying these things a lot in this series, and so I thought it would be a good kind of conversation to end on.
Okay.
But I was listening to a podcast a couple weeks ago, and the one and only, how much respect I have for her, Jackie Hill Perry was on it.
Yeah.
And I think she's really, really awesome. And so she's on this podcast, and they were talking about just kind of getting into all things ministry and, speaking and all those things. And she kind of brought up this idea that it's funny for her how whenever she's referenced, whenever she's brought somewhere or on a podcast or whatever, she's just the girl who used to be gay. And she started talking about how, there's so much that she has done, or the person who was interviewing her was like, your other book was way more influential than Gay Girl, Good God, but everybody just references Gay Girl, Good God. And, every time you speak at Passion, you're the sermon that goes everywhere and explodes, and you're not talking about gay at all. And, but that's kind of attached to her of just, she was the girl that used to be gay and now she's not. And so she kind of got talking about this, and they're both black, the two that were on this podcast talking about this, and they brought up this whole idea of I'll never understand how people say that a lot when they bring up conversations about transgender, bring up conversations about homosexuality, bring up conversations about race, all these things, and how that's the kind of the thing you hear a lot of, I'll never understand what that's like, or I'll never understand what it's like to struggle with this, right?
That I said I'm a white man.
And they kind of got into this idea a little bit of, I'll never understand what it's like, I'll never understand. And they kind of made this point of, for people who are struggling with, let's say, homosexuality or transgender or who are a different race than us, people who hear that all the time of, I'll never understand, it actually could make them feel more alienated to where, my problems must just be so terrible, or we just must be so distant in our race or what we look like that this person will never, ever, ever understand me. Like, whoa. And so I thought it was an interesting perspective to bring up on this kind of conversation, because that actually might divide the us versus them thing bigger when we just all the time say, I'll never understand. Well, there's actually resources out there to understand a little bit, and you can sit down with people who look different than you and have different experiences with you, and guess what? You'll understand a little bit more than you did before. Right. So I think maybe the better approach to this is I will never experience what it's like to be black in America, ever. I will never, I won't experience what it's like to struggle with same-sex attraction. I won't, but I can understand it. I can do a better job of educating myself and bringing clarity to some of these issues so that I better understand what these people are going through, right? And what their experience is like. I'll never walk in their shoes and get it completely, sure, but I can understand it. I can educate myself if I'm passionate, if I know somebody who's struggling or different than me. I can do my work and my part to educate myself, to read books, to listen to podcasts, to talk to them so that I actually do understand it a little bit better. I thought it was a really interesting perspective on these kind of conversations that I've never thought of before, and I am super guilty of getting up there talking about these issues and saying, I will never understand. I've said it on this podcast. I will never understand what that's like. And now I'm kind of in my own mind taking some steps back and going, I don't know if I want to say that anymore as passionately as I have in the past, because if there's somebody listening or watching that does struggle with things or looks very different than us, I don't want to look at you and say, I'll never understand, because I actually kind of want to do the work on my part to educate myself better to get it a little bit more. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
But I think we all know what we mean when we say that.
Sure.
But we're trying to relate to the person to not sound like I can be an expert on a topic that I've never experienced.
Sure.
And I don't want to come across as an expert on something that I've not experienced. I've not been a minority, and I've not been dealing with some of these same temptations. So how can I talk about it? I think what you're saying is great. I think that that discussion is good. I think we need to figure out ways to say things better. We're always trying to. I think what I would say is I'm trying to understand. I'm striving to understand.
Absolutely.
I'm growing. And I will tell you this, and you might say this about me. I would say it about myself. I think I understand these issues better now than I did 6 weeks ago.
Right. Absolutely.
Because
you've done the work to educate, to bring clarity.
Yes. I mean, we've had lots of discussions. I run the sermon by you to get some feedback on these issues from somebody your age and how you perceive it. I mean, and that is growing me. Mm-hmm. I am learning more, and I understand people that are struggling in these areas more than I did.
Exactly.
So I'm not going to ever say, I walked in your shoes.
No, that's wrong.
Jackie Hill Perry can say she walked in the shoes of a person who was gay.
Absolutely.
She can.
Yep.
I mean, for her, that's going to be hard to ever get away from.
Sure.
And I think God uses her because of that.
Oh, yeah.
And in an amazing way. More than that, but that's given her a platform. So I think that's not something to hide from. She's not. But I think it's like it probably can get old to her to always hear that, just like anybody who's struggling with anything. And I think we don't want to become a broken record in what we say. And I think you and I both, as public speakers, we need to always be thinking about, we can develop some habits that were good when we started them, and now they're like old, or we just run them into the ground. We've said it the same way. And we start saying things the same way over and over, the people start just not hearing anymore, or they start just shutting us down like, oh, here they go again, saying they don't relate. Yeah. That's what you were saying. I think that's important. Yeah, like I don't relate to it. There's a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot of things. Like I did not, and as a teenager, same for you. I mean, I was a youth pastor, you are one. I didn't have a long, deep, rebellious running from God period.
Sure.
So that means you can't relate to students that are running from God, that are doing drugs, that are rebelling from their parents. That doesn't mean that. No, it doesn't mean that. You can't say, well, yeah, I did the exact same thing as you.
Right.
And then we got to just think about all of that when it comes to relating to people.
Yeah, definitely. Any closing thoughts? Anything else you want to add? I think that's it for me.
I think that's it.
We got one more episode next week. That'll be the last episode of this season, and we got one more week of the White Elephant series here at
the White Elephant. Yes, bring your gifts this Sunday.
Yep.
Draw a number when you come in.
3 steals.
We'll have a 500-person White Elephant exchange this Sunday in the service. So that'll be exciting.
Anyway.
Yeah.
We will see you next week on the In All Things podcast. Have an amazing week, and that's all we got. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the In All Things podcast. Our challenge for you today is to send this episode to one person. Seriously, think of somebody right now that could use this conversation and send it to them. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic ideas, please send them to podcast@sycamorecreek.org, and make sure you follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Sycamore Creek Church so that you can always see what's going on in our world. If this conversation helped you at all, make sure you share it, leave a review, and subscribe so that you don't miss out on a single episode. We love you, God loves you, and we'll see you next week on the In All Things podcast.